Yes.
Usually, I try to keep it in different rooms, but it is possible also.
Yeah.
But we will be live in around a minute, so we can start on time. People are usually joining 12, 5:10, 5:07, 5:15. That's usual Indian IST, no? We are live, by the way, just to know that we are. And I will share the live in LinkedIn. Himanshu, I could not find your LinkedIn.
I'm nowhere. I'm not on
Not
social media.
everywhere, omnipresent but invisible like groundwater.
No, I'm actually more visible than many people.
Yes,
I'm visible in the real sense.
yes, on the
I'm
ground,
not visible. I'm not visible in the invisible sense.
in the digital space.
Uh,
Okay, so no problem. But I'm just keeping you informed so that you know that this will be live on YouTube and LinkedIn. So just give me a moment because I'm sharing all the links. And we have had nearly
sure.
700 speakers who have a group. So I also share it there because most people from our ex-speakers group, they are watching it on YouTube than on Zoom because it gives them probably, I don't know what is the reason, but I feel myself also when I am doing it, I feel more flexible to be in the session and keep doing my own work or something like that. So people are joining on YouTube more than Zoom, just in short. Okay. So we will take questions from Zoom or YouTube also because they have the option to type it there, not speak. Okay. If there are
So you'll
questions.
moderate the questions, right? You'll tell me
Yes,
what questions
of
people
course,
ask.
I will be moderating the questions also. But if there are no questions, I am also full of questions, as I mentioned.
All right.
So, okay. People take time to, craft their questions. And by the time I have already asked 2, 3, 4, 5 questions. So it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. No problems.
We are live and I'm just setting the document because I usually draft a document what I will speak and see if I'm ready there. And we can go when we feel like. So Himanshu, shall we start or do you want to wait for some time?
Whatever you tell me, you're the
Yeah,
boss.
I will prefer to start because we can be little bit more disciplined. People will join, so we can let them enter later. Okay, slowly and slowly. Yeah, we can get started. Yeah.
Yeah, somebody was actually trying to get in, I think.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
So actually,
Anyway,
because I will be speaking first 1 or 2 minutes around, I have also made you co-host if you can let people in because I may not notice it sometime. Usually I will do it, but just for this first 2 minutes, you also have the right to allow people so that you know. Okay?
yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. We let us start so that we can also finish on time and a little bit more disciplined. Warm greetings, everyone. On behalf of W4W Foundation, a think tank instituted as Citizens Collective, we welcome you to another session of Wednesdays for Water. The session today will be on groundwater aquifers, society, and ecosystems. The session is also part of the Meet a Maestro series, and we very rarely catch hold of these legends in the water sector. And it happens once in a blue moon in the last 5 years. But in addition to Meet a Maestro series, we also do pollution series, biodiversity series, water anxiety series, riverscape series, water education series. All these have been part of the Wednesdays for Waters series of W4W Foundation. And before we get into the session, I would like to highlight the objectives of W4W Foundation. what it does, it is to engage in conversation with water experts, grassroots practitioners, policy makers, and youth to explore the complex intertwined issues associated with the water and the possible solutions these people are seeking forth or working upon. Wednesdays for Water has been so successful. Actually, we are celebrating today, inching towards 200 sessions. But overall, because of its success, we had to expand it to Friday Waters, where we have 4 sessions like Friday Water Talkies, Water Reading Club, Water Thesis Club, and Water Arts. In addition, we have really run a very successful 100 sessions on Monday Munching and Musing with Women for Water, where we acknowledge and appreciate the contribution of women in the water sector. That series is going to close next Monday. So these are all online sessions, but in addition, we are also doing on-site water workshops, water walks and talks, over 100 of them in last 4 years, seminars, special courses and conference panels, water festival, in order to continue this water conversation in various possible ways. At W4W, our idea or our foundation is based on just one simple line. Water conversation is the way towards water conservation. This is Mansibal Bhargav from the house of W4W, and I have been the fortunate person to be host for most of the sessions, over 400 sessions, and listen to these wonderful people, around 700 of them, and bringing this knowledge to over 7,000 people across the world. We are really fortunate to have this knowledge available as open access for everyone at www.w4w.in. The session today, Groundwater Aquifers and Society and Ecosystems, need no introduction in terms of the topic. And then we have Dr. Himanshu Kulkarni to speak about this important issue, which is not only about the country, but also about the world. But we will invite him. But before that, I would like to do a short introduction of Dr. Himanshu Kulkarni. Dr. Himanshu Kulkarni is the founder, trustee, and formerly executive director and currently scientist emeritus with Aquadam. And Dr. Kulkarni is also associated with many leading academic institutions, just to name a few: professor of practice at the School of Humanities and Social Science at Shiv Nadar University and visiting professor at Ashank Desai Center for Policy Studies at IIT Mumbai. Much of his work has been through Aquadam's field-based program on the singular topic of groundwater, beginning with research when he spent more than a decade at University of Pune. Dr. Kulkarni has been also working on aquifers and community action across India's diverse groundwater typology for over 4 decades. Much of his work has been through Aquadam's program across India, often in partnership with many universities, institutions, and organizations. He has also held advisory positions on various committees of the government, apart from anchoring many action research collaborations on groundwater, including international programs. He continues his publication work. We are all inspired by him, to be honest. He lectures in universities and classrooms and in many public forums. He's one of our most favorite speakers around the country, and we are very fortunate to have him here as he continues his work on bringing a strong aquifer-based pedagogy into various dimensions of water management. We know the state of groundwater in the country, so we are really fortunate to have him here. Just a few opening lines before I invite him. India's groundwater 2024 reports show an extraction of 245 plus billion cubic meters with nearly 70% overall development rate and with 4.3 billion cubic meter increase in usage in the last year. What is more interesting is many cities, many states are drawing more than 100% of replenishment. And just giving one example of a city, which is Chennai, is drawing more than 127% of its annual recharge. Thank you so much, Dr. Kulkarni. And I will call you Himanshu from here onwards to keep the conversation flowing. The screen is yours, and we really look forward to having you here and celebrating our 200 sessions of Wednesdays for Water.
Thank you, Mansi. And thank you, Wednesdays for Water, for inviting me. I'm actually not an expert of any kind on the subject. So I'm going to talk to you more as a student of groundwater and even more as somebody who has been working in the field, mainly through Aquadam and through my earlier avatar as a student as a researcher at the University of Pune. It's just that I don't look like a student. I'm a very, very old student, but so be it. So I thought I'll make this into a short introduction of the broad contours of what I would otherwise give as a longer talk. But in order for us to have some time for conversation, at least 50% of our time for conversations, I thought I'd do this. So let me share my screen, if you'll just allow me a moment. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, it's visible.
Yeah, and let
If you
me
could, slideshow, please.
hide the floating panels. I'll put it in slideshow.
Yes.
Visible?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So I'm going to sort of throw out a few thoughts on this interrelationship between aquifers, society, and ecosystems. Of course, with the centrality of groundwater in place. So let me begin. This is about Aquadam, the organization I represent. A lot of our work happens through partnerships across India's socio-hydro-ecologic landscape. And we do many things. I've just listed them out here. Urban aquifer management and governance. We look at disasters. We look at climate. We look at the nexus between energy, groundwater, and agriculture. And dominantly, we work on a participatory approach to groundwater management and governance. So groundwater is central to our work. We don't work on anything else but groundwater. And we work across India's extremely diverse landscape, social landscape, the hydrological systems, the hydrogeological settings in India, and of course, therefore, the diverse ecology that India represents. Let's move on. So a lot of our work, let me put this here. A lot of our work is around building capacity, working in partnership with organizations through an action research mode, and of course, using our work for outreach. This is, of course, the presentation is a part of CCLN, so I've just put that out. And I like to begin the main part of the presentation by saying that the Earth is our ecosystem, and it's constantly evolving. By training, by basic training, I'm a geologist. So I've been trained to look at the Earth as a geologist. And therefore, it's important for us to understand that if the Earth is our ecosystem today, the Earth itself has evolved over 4.5 billion years. And our existence on Earth as the first hominins was only 2 million years. So when we look at the human-Earth system interrelationship, it's extremely skewed in terms of the time we've spent. And in this very short period of time, how much have we altered the Earth system for ourselves? I think no other living being on Earth has been able to do that. So, the Earth is dynamic in terms of time. The Earth is also dynamic in terms of space. Whether when we look at the terrestrial and marine ecosystems or subsystems, the spatial dimension of the Earth, as we see today, was never like this before. And that's where, a geologist is trained on the subject of plate tectonics through geological time. How were terrestrial and marine subsystems different as compared to what they are today? So what is interesting is this relationship is constantly evolving on geological timescales. It's just that we don't notice it in the short time we have here, or in terms of one's lifetime. Now, we know the definition of an ecosystem. I've just put the slide on show. Now, anyway, let me admit. So, a system that hosts a typical set of living and non-living elements. And therefore, we have terrestrial ecosystems, we have aquatic ecosystems, again divided into marine and freshwater systems, lentic, lotic, wetlands. Of course, there are many other classifications, but this is a broad canvas of classifications. Now, what is interesting with ecosystems also is the fact that when we look at the Earth history and the long history of the Earth, ecosystems have also been evolving over various timescales, short, medium, and long term. And we must accept that as well. Consider, for example, climate and the Earth's cooling and warming history. I've just borrowed this from a publication. What is interesting is there are warming episodes and there are cooling episodes. And I think the author starts with 2 million years BP, which is really early hominids. But a lot of this is in the last 14,000 years. And these 14,000 years are extremely important for us because when we look at cooling and warming, there are almost 10 to 11 episodes of major climate aberrations in terms of cooling and warming just in the last 14,000 years. So obviously that must have led to a significant change in Earth's ecosystems. Now we know about the water cycle, and therefore these changes in the Earth's history must also have made changes in the water cycle. And clearly, even as of now, we see how climate change, significant climate changes, bring about certain changes in the water cycle. Imagine what happens in the longer term. So nothing is constant, is what I'd like to begin with. So major climate shifts at least 10 times during the entry of hominins in Earth history, and 9 times in the last 14,000 years. Now, one of the things that happens in this entire argument, the big picture is what I'm trying to paint, is where do aquifers or groundwater systems fit in the larger scheme of things? They are part of the larger water cycle. They also have their own cycles of recharge and discharge, but how much importance do we attribute to groundwater when we deliver a session on water cycle, for example? Right from our school education to higher education on water cycle, water balances, global water balances, somehow I feel that the whole groundwater piece gets completely ignored. Okay, let's go on. So there are recharge and discharge elements to this cycle. There's also storage. So, okay. Now, that's the first piece. Now, the next piece is about groundwater in India. And I'll refer to certain elements in the world. Now, groundwater usage in India goes back thousands of years. I mean, some of the oldest wells are dated to be about 4,000 years before present, the Harappan period. There are places in other parts of the world where there are older wells going back 10,000 years before present. So wells have a long history. And this long history of roughly around 10,000 years, 4,000 to 5,000 years in India, have broadly 4 elements. There are very ancient wells. There are community management systems around wells for hundreds of years. such as the step wells like Neemrana, for example, in Alwar. There are technologies which have evolved in the last 2,000 to 3,000 years, such as the Persian wheel, called the rehets in some parts, called the moats in other parts, called the chadasis in Rajasthan, the chadas. Then there are springs and well systems that are based on the qanats and karazes that were operational in Persia and Afghanistan, respectively. We call them the surangas here. Modified, of course, from established world systems. So this is a very long history. And what this history actually tells us is the fact that till the 19th century, from the last 10,000 years, access for groundwater was widespread, but was from shallow sources, often community dug wells, springs, and qanat systems. Extraction, mainly from wells, was through human and animal attractions. There were different technologies, mechanisms, pulleys, moats, gears, but the power was provided by human strength or animal strength. Now let's see when we actually come into today's world. I want to begin by saying that, when you look at the groundwater civilization bit of the Earth's history, today we are so caught up with rivers and the visible water that we see that it dominates our mindsets. And we talk inadvertently of river valley civilizations, which also included groundwater, perhaps. And maybe there are areas where it was dominantly a groundwater civilization. Now, I'm just summarizing what happened in India in the last 8 decades. Moving into the 20th century from the 19th century. And many people have worked on this. So I've just put up this summary. It's also a reflection of all the literature that I've read. So each decade was a milestone in terms of water in India. We took on the colonial practices and mindset of large irrigation infrastructure on one side and rain-fed agriculture on the other side. And we had to really deal with food security. So initially we planned for dams and canals, but that didn't happen at the speed at which we needed food. So we actually got our farmers going in and foraying into wells. They constructed wells, and wells became the cornerstone of developing food security for India. Food security also underwent a big push through the Green Revolution. But a lot of the well irrigation that went into food security was dominantly through wells that never got acknowledged. They were invisible, they were small as compared to large dam infrastructure. Not that large dam infrastructure did not help, but it did not reach the amount of areas that we were supposed to irrigate and develop our food security on. 1970s, droughts, transfer of technology, mainly for drinking water security, mainly drilling rigs and hand pumps, wells still with human and animal powered system, but now we had boreholes and deep tube wells. 80s, technology adaptation, 90s, rural electrification, and of course, deep drilling, introduction of submersible pumps, shift in cropping and markets. So we started becoming food secure, and therefore we started looking at cropping systems that were more market oriented than food security oriented. Now, this is when the earliest signs of exploitation and contamination emerged. This is also a period when the push for conservation of water grew. 2000s, massive competition around groundwater, deep wells, deep drilling, high capacity pumps, growth of intensive agriculture, and alarm bells in many areas. Again, push for conservation and recharge. Today, at least, there is an acceptance of the groundwater crisis. There are many good efforts at water management, conservation, But I believe we are still getting into a very new phase of what I call hydroschizophrenia, where we are trying to build up our reserves through a very, very business as usual approach of mission mode work without understanding the nuances of aquifers, without understanding the science of groundwater. And this is what actually worries me most. That yes, we need conservation. Yes, we need rainwater harvesting, but we need to do it strategically. We need to do it safely. We need to make sure that it is efficient, productive, and there is a balance between demand and supply. So anyway, I'll come to that in a short while. So this story, both in terms of the crisis and the response to the crisis, was largely an invisible story until the last couple of decades. The obvious impacts of this story in the last whatever years, broadly, depletion of aquifers, drying up of water sources such as wells, springs, and even rivers, contamination of aquifers, and the larger impact on the environment and ecosystem, mainly around reduced base flows and therefore e-flows of rivers. So if I were to actually summarize the last 70 to 80 years of this extremely rapid transition, this is true of other parts of the world as well. We've increased our number of sources. There are 40 million wells. There are deeper wells. Access has become individualized, moved out of community access, and therefore the access has become more competitive in more ways than one. Extraction has become, people call it more efficient extraction because you can now extract large volumes of groundwater over short periods of time. Forgetting that rates of extraction are not matching the rates at which aquifers are able to provide you water over short term, medium term, and long term. So in many ways, we've converted a common pool resource, that's groundwater, to a private property resource. It's not become private property in the full sense of the word, but this entire story has made the resource transition from a common pool resource to a private property resource. So let's get along with it. I referred to aquifers. And one of the blind spots in our thinking is actually we thought about sources and sources and sources for so long that we forgot the fact that it's a resource. It's the resource of aquifers that provides water or groundwater to sources like springs, like wells. And in order to understand aquifers, we need to study many things. First of all, we need to understand that the definition of aquifers has 4 or 5 parts. It's a rock formation that needs to be saturated with water. It needs to store and transmit reasonable quantities of water or groundwater to our sources like springs and wells. So there are many dimensions in this. Now, I'll go to the next part, which is groundwater and ecosystems. So, for the last 80 years, we did not think about the connections between the invisible world of aquifers below and the visible world of different ecosystems on the surface of the earth. Let me show you a few things. So it's a chicken and egg problem. When we put wells in a river channel, it's an indicator of a complex crisis. Whether the river has dried up first or whether the wells upstream have dried up, that compels people to actually seek water in rivers, seek groundwater in rivers, right bang in the middle of rivers from where it's probably easier access now. So it's a very, very complex crisis. And I'll tell you a story about a single aquifer that I was looking at from 1983 to 1992. This is where my learning started. on how aquifer exploitation was unfolding in India. Just in one village, one aquifer, and one could see how groundwater levels went down, both during the monsoon season and in the following summer season as well. Mind you, in this 11-year period, normal or average and above rainfall years, out of 11 years, there were 8 years of normal and above rainfall, above normal rainfall. There were only 3 years of below normal rainfall, which means that climate was not a big factor. But that apart, if you look at the base of the stream bed, which receives water from the aquifer to sustain non-monsoon dry season base flows, this is what happened. In the first few years, this was a pre-depletion, pre-aquifer depletion monsoon level. And in the summer, it used to drop to this level. There was a 2-meter drop in groundwater level. So the aquifer and the river channel were in connection. There was always some flow, at least a trickle in the summer season. So the river channel carried water for 12 months of the year. Post 1986, 87, this is what started happening. So today, the monsoon level, the post-depletion monsoon level in the aquifer, and therefore in the river, is about that much. And then it starts dropping. And then it goes down to that level in the summer season. So near the wells, there was a 5-meter long-term, there's a 5-meter seasonal drop now as compared to the 2-meter seasonal drop before aquifer exploitation started. So now there's a complete disconnect between the aquifers and the ecosystem, which is the river. So I think one of the roles we have is how do we ensure the integrity of the interconnectedness between aquifers and ecosystems? In short, can we look at this relationship through 3 lenses? Aquifers themselves as ecosystems. So how do aquifers function as ecosystems independently? Aquifers in larger ecosystems like mountains or flat plains or deserts or tropical rainforests, or the role of aquifers for ecosystem conservation. There are 3 lenses I'm proposing. And especially when you look at the recharge stocks and discharge from aquifers, the recharge to aquifers, the stocks in aquifers, and the discharge from aquifers, you can realize that there are various interconnections. I'm not going to read through all of these. Changes in ecosystems, such as climate, weather, soils, land cover, land use, physical changes in water bodies, are obviously going to impact aquifers. Similarly, aquifer contamination and overexploitation, whether it's dynamic or static in time, will, on the other hand, affect ecosystems. So both affect each other and are affected by fluxes. Natural disasters, exploitation, contamination, changes in land use and land cover, human competition, and even conflict that we are witnessing in such severity today that it's unprecedented. How does conflict, for example, affect ecosystems in an area? How does it affect aquifers in an area? Is a question that we need to ponder. I'll show you a quick graphic and I will end in the next 2 minutes. Resource. So take an aquifer as a resource. There are other resources which interact with an aquifer. So for example, a forest resource will interact with an aquifer resource. There could be river systems, rivers as resources that could interact with aquifers. And then, of course, there's the earth, the larger earth system that integrates all these resources. So let's call it the larger system. If you pull out an aquifer, and if you look at an aquifer-centric interrelationship, then one is the larger ecosystem that provides inputs and accepts outputs from the aquifer, inputs to and outputs from the aquifer. And then there's a human element. And I'll come to that in a moment. So the system, so for example, the earth, the surface of the earth, whether it's a forest, whether it's a desert, whether it's whatever system, is providing an input to the aquifer in terms of natural recharge. The aquifer accepts the recharge as stocks. It has its own behavior in terms of flows and quality. And it releases that water naturally as discharge through springs, through seeps that contribute to river systems, lakes, wetlands, whatnot, other ecosystems. Then there is the human element. Human demand is like a system input to the aquifer. So we demand water from the aquifer. And in order to meet the demand, we create a supply, which is essentially the output from the aquifer in terms of pumping to meet this demand. Now, you see, it's a very complex relationship. And one is looking at that relationship through the aquifer lens, through the centrality of aquifers. And that is what we need to think about. So when an aquifer depletes over a long time frame, there are changes in its flows within the aquifer, but even in terms of the flows into the aquifer, like recharge, and the flows out of the aquifer in terms of base flows and extraction. And all these have an interplay with each other. So my last bit, and just in a moment, how do you co-manage these integrated commons? I'm calling them commons, whether they're ecosystems like lakes, forests, or aquifers. How do we co-manage them? And the co-management is really about just a few things. One is we need to look at ecosystems, all ecosystems, aquifers and otherwise, as a common pool resource, where there are two elements. Sorry, let me go back. There is the aquifer, which is the rock formation and the pore space in the formation. And there is water inside those pore space, which are the resource units. So there's a system and there are units. We are worried about the units. That's all we are worried about. We want groundwater, whether it comes from an aquifer or otherwise, we don't care. Now, the aquifer is a rock system. We need to remember that without the rock system, there wouldn't be an aquifer. So the resource system is equally important. Similarly, each resource system, like an aquifer, provides goods. It provides, say, in a planned system, irrigation water to 10 farmers in a water user group that allocates water at 1,000 cubic meters of water every year per farmer. Now, we have to make sure that when we provide these goods in that quantity, the base flow contribution that the aquifer is providing to our river ecosystem does not go down, does not get compromised. So goods and services also have an interplay with each other, like resource system and resource units. So balancing goods and services of these commons is important in co-managing aquifer system and ecosystem services. Now, that brings me to my last slide. And I think it's important for us to understand that any area that we work in, if we were to look at it in terms of aquifer health and ecosystem health, the overlying ecosystem, whatever lies above the aquifer on the surface of the ground needs to be in a certain degree of health and aquifer health. And you get 4 quadrants. Quadrant number 1 is when both are fairly healthy. Quadrant number 2 is when aquifer health goes down, but there's still a pristine ecosystem on top. And there are areas in India where which I could put in number 2. Number 3 is bad. It's poor in terms of ecosystem and aquifer health, both. And number 4 is where there's not too much of groundwater extraction or contamination. So aquifer health is in place, but the ecosystem is in complete disarray. There's deforestation, there's devegetation, the landscape has changed. And therefore, you could actually put different parts of India or even the world in these 4 categories. This is something that I have modified from something that I was part of, a larger group, a global group, where the International Water Management Institute actually put together a group to work on a document that looked at groundwater and ecosystems. So this is part of that. And I will therefore close by saying that I started with the earth. The genesis of the earth has led to the genesis of aquifers. So there's a long history of rocks that define aquifers that span the earth history. It's a 4.5 billion years legacy. So an aquifer as a heritage system is something that we need to think about. There's a long history of aquifers. There's a long history of groundwater use during human evolution, which is how societies evolved. The here and now of groundwater in society today, the here and now of aquifers and ecosystems together in societal thinking today. And I think that is where we need to transform ourselves and think through this entire canvas that I've tried to lay out before you in a short period of time. So I'll stop sharing and I will come back to have this conversation with you. Over to you, Himanshu.
Thank you so much, Himanshu, for this wonderful conversation and also highlighting a few things which we often take, I think, in complacency for granted. But let me just summarize. Meanwhile, our participants can warm up to ask questions. And first thing first, aquifer as an heritage, biggest learning for today. Because we have so much of talk about heritage when we look at humanly constructed heritage, and aquifer actually should stand up tall in this list. And you started talking about how deep percolated its impact when we compare it to dams, as dams are important, and then why aquifer makes huge impact into our landscape, not only in ecosystem but also in our social landscape because of its outreach. I learned a new word today, hydroschizophrenia, which is important for all of us to know as environmental workers, where how fragmented we are in terms of talking about these things, not only in scholarship, but also in practice and policy. And you also actually highlighted the very tenets of social ecological system framework developed from Elinor Ostrom's work, which I could relate because I have been working in that zone. One important aspect which you also highlighted is how a community or common pool resource slowly got converted into an individualistic or private property resource, not in the real sense, but actually in terms of extraction, it is like that now. Then important aspect you also highlighted is how the rate of extraction is so huge and much higher than the aquifer can actually provide us. And of course, I'm adding to it that the rate of recharge is minuscule if you see it in today's context. And it was very striking to see, and I often questioned also myself in my work on lakes, when we see wells, percolation wells, which are so much promoted left, right, and center in the country, when they are put on the river beds and lake beds. And you presented it very well. What does it signal? It signals the complex crisis, and you were mentioning it, whether the river is dried or there is some problem in the upstream, or is the well drying later on. So this was something very shocking for me also to look at it from this lens, because I thought it is always from the lens of getting water from the deeper part, but which means river is not literally dry. That's what I could read from you. Then there was an important part which you highlighted on integrity and the interconnectedness of aquifer and ecosystem, which was, I think, the highlight of your presentation today, how you brought together the interconnectedness and the complex relationships they have with a larger ecosystem. You started from planet Earth or Mother Earth and to coming to the smaller scale of looking at one well, where you showed how one well monitoring has really shown the groundwater depletion, and explaining the whole framework of recharge to discharge from human needs or demand and supply, which was really important to understand bit by bit the way you explained it, and understanding how the stocks and storage of aquifer can be looked at. And you close with also an important part, where is co-management of integrate of this common pool resource, and what are the trade-offs we have at this point in time because of the interconnectedness between aquifer and ecosystem. I hope I did justice to summarize the session, but I had to keep it short. But maybe we have a question in the chat box. I am full of questions, as I was already telling you when we were preparing. But to do the honor with our participants here, we always like the conversation. Kasturi Joshi, would you like to ask by yourself, or Himanshu, would you like to check in the chat box? I can also read it for you. So
Yeah, you can possibly read it, because I
yes,
think the
I
audience
will do that.
also
I will
benefit.
do that. Kasturi, are you around, or would you like to engage in a conversation? That will be nice for us. That's what we encourage.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, sir, for that information. It was very helpful. So my question is that how can we recharge aquifers in urban areas, given there is so much of concretization and impervious surfaces? So how can we recharge our aquifers? And the other following question is that is there any platform where we can find aquifer mapping for cities of Maharashtra? So if we plan to recharge our wells, our bore wells, so how do we know that which is the appropriate location for doing the recharge? Thank you so much.
Yeah. So I think we'll take a couple of questions, then I can
Yes.
respond to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So Kedar, if you may like to ask a question, or I would like to, or you want me to do that. We actually encourage our participants to ask, because we want more people visible. And please open your video if it is possible. Thank you, Kedar.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you, madam, and good evening all. So that graph you showed with X and Y axis and the ecosystem health and the aquifer health is regarding that. The ecosystem health is easy to imagine because it is like widely discussed and talked about. The question I have put in the chat box is the aquifer health. When we are saying, is it about, say, we see the sand mining happening in the river beds, or mining for the minerals happening at the hilltops? So in short, removal of the water-bearing strata or the geological formation, whether you are referring to that as the health of aquifer, or is it something else? Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Go
So
ahead.
should I respond to these two
Yes,
questions
please,
quickly?
please. Yes, please.
So, for who was the first question? I think it was Kasturi, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it was me.
Yeah. So, you know, there is aquifer mapping. The CGWP is doing aquifer mapping. They started in 2010, and I was in some ways one of the catalysts for starting that whole exercise. I was, of course, advising the Planning Commission at that time, in that point in time. So there's a program, and they have developed aquifer mapping reports for many districts of India. They also developed for many talukas of India. We undertake a lot of aquifer mapping at Aquadyn, and we've been doing it for, I've been doing it for the last 40 years. But the scale at which aquifer mapping is required and the scale at which aquifer mapping is available are extremely skewed. They don't talk to each other. So unless we go down to the hyper-local scale, you see the problem of groundwater is hyper-local. You go to some of the rural areas of India, and you will find that in a cluster of 20 villages, about 15 villages have severe problems of groundwater exploitation. There are aquifers, there's aquifer depletion, wells have dried up, all sorts of things. Out of the remaining 5, 2 villages do not have aquifer exploitation, but they have severe problems of groundwater contamination. And then there's a couple of villages where there's actually no development of groundwater. There are no wells, it's all rain-fed farming. So when you look at these 3 situations, you are required to approach them through 3 different sets of solutions, even in the same area. So I don't think recharge can be planned that way. Even in urban areas, like Pune, for example, we have identified something like 28 aquifer units. And we have identified natural recharge areas for these units. Now, some aquifers will have lesser storage, but they are serving a larger ecosystem purpose. Some will have larger elements of exploitation. Some will have contamination. So your aquifer mapping has to be oriented towards, I mean, why are you mapping? Mapping is a process, not an output that delivers a map to you. Unless you work at hyperlocal scales, you cannot solve this problem. For Kedar's point, actually, if you'll allow me, I'll just show you 1 or 2 slides. Okay.
Go ahead, please.
In the meantime, if there are questions, we can also take questions. Let me just bring out that presentation.
So we would like to encourage participants to either put their digital hand and open their video to ask questions, or chat box is of course there. We really appreciate this conversation at Wednesdays for Water. As I was mentioning in the beginning, we strongly believe conversation is the way to conservation. So please go ahead and ask your questions or comments or suggestions. And if you want to be speaker on our sessions, please let us know. Leave your email ID at the chat box and tell us where we can find you. Or write to us at hellow4w@gmail.com.
Okay, so let me just share these couple of slides. Okay, here is a slide they're not necessarily in order. Okay, so I'm just going ahead. For the recharge areas we have mapped. Now, when you have a map like this, and there's an aquifer map as well, one of the things you can do is you can look at how a city has expanded over the last 100 years. And you can arrive at something like this, that in a city like Pune, captive watersheds, so watersheds that are within the city limits, are built upon. This is obvious. This is what people talk about. But aquifer recharge zones that are built upon, mostly unacknowledged, because people do not know what aquifers are. People do not know where aquifers are. And therefore, people do not know where aquifer recharge zones are. There's only 10 to 15% of open spaces left that are unbuilt on the natural recharge zones of Pune's aquifers, as compared to 20 years ago, or well, as compared to 30 years ago, or 100 years ago. 100 years ago, more or less 80, 90%. But now, only 10, 15%. That's what we have built. Okay. Now, the other thing I'd like to show you, let me just jump through the slides. So this is like the layers of basalt that constitute aquifers. Okay. This is just a broad map. Now, for Kedar's question on the removal of aquifer material, you have unbuilt open ground surface in a rural area, which gets converted to an urban area. So this is the shallow unconfined aquifer. This is the groundwater table. When it gets converted, you build infrastructure. And for infrastructure, you excavate the material in the shallow unconfined aquifer. Maybe not in all locations, but in Pune, like at least 50%, 60% of the locations, just building deep basements has led to a permanent loss of 1 million cubic meters of aquifer material. Gone, permanently gone. 65 million year old legacy destroyed This is what I'm talking about. We are still caught up with what we are doing on the surface. We are still caught up with sand mining. The sand in a river basin, in a river bed, is only a small proportion of what we see. Sand in a river bed is not an aquifer. We have to also change that mindset of we look at only those things, we think only of those things that we see. Sand mining is bad. But what is worse is when we excavate, when we mine blindly, without any planning, without looking at the impact it is going to have. So development for one purpose may lead to an impact on the other, but we never make a conscious effort at looking at the trade-off. I'm fine if somebody accepts the fact that, okay, we are going to mine this area, but that would actually mean that we are going to reduce the aquifer storage in that area by 20%. Fine. Accept, acknowledge, and consciously make a decision on the trade-off. If we don't mine, then this is what the growth is not going to, this is growth that's not going to, it's going to affect the growth trajectory of a region or a country. Fine. So in order to promote growth, you have to sacrifice something, but at least make a conscious effort to tell people that this is what needs to be sacrificed. Then I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
Hardly do that. And that's where the cookie crumbles.
Yeah, thank you so much for these responses. I see some shades of ignorance, but topped with policy arrogance, if I may put those words. And I am also looking at more comments in the chat box and holding on to my questions. I see, Zeenath, your question has actually been responded by Himanshu now. Let's go to Vaishnavi. Vaishnavi, you have mention of Solapur in Maharashtra. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question? Okay, let me ask it then. She wants to also, she has mentioned about Solapur in Maharashtra, which is a structurally drought-prone semi-arid region, and yet occasionally it experiences heavy, intense rainfall. And she's trying to understand what such rare shock events mean for groundwater system in a hard rock basalt aquifer setting. Do these floods translate into any meaningful recharge for the aquifer that people depend on? Then we want to also understand what commons means in such a region, which indicators, and if she can look in the region. Any insights she's looking for her studies actually. Go ahead. And let me ask one more question from Abdul Khan. Abdul Khan, if you are around, would you like to ask yourself or should I speak on your behalf? We encourage actually participants to ask. Okay.
You're on mute. You're on mute, sir.
Let me just unmute him. Okay, I'm not able to unmute. Sir, please unmute yourself.
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
मैं मैडम कस्तूरी जोशी के क्वेश्चन का आंसर देना चाहता हूँ। मैम इसका बेहतरीन सोल्यूशन ये है कि हम आजकल इंजेक्शन बेड बनाए जा रहे हैं। हमें रिवर के अंदर अपना हम बेयर या बराज बना करके आपके स्ट्रीम में हम इंजेक्शन बेड बनाते हैं, उसके थ्रू हम एक्वाफर को रिचार्ज करते हैं। इसका एग्जाम्पल जो है कोशी रिवर है रामपुर में, डिस्ट्रिक्ट उत्तर प्रदेश में। उत्तर प्रदेश के डिस्ट्रिक्ट रामपुर के कोशी रिवर में किया गया है इसका एक्सपेरिमेंट। ये बहुत सक्सेसफुल एक्सपेरिमेंट है, जिसमें हम रिवर के ऊपर किसी भी रिवर पे किसी ड्रेस के ऊपर पहले बियर या बराज बनाते हैं, पानी को इकट्ठा करते हैं, उसके आप स्ट्रीम में जो है इंजेक्शन बेड बना करके हम ग्राउंड वाटर को रिचार्ज करते हैं, एक्वाफर को रिचार्ज करते हैं।
जी, Himanshu, would you like to take the two questions?
Yeah, I think the second one by Mr. Khan is not a question. It's mostly about his experience. And
It is answer. It is answer.
Ji.
Not question. It is answer.
Ji,
So
thank you, sir.
See, I would actually look at floods because they're mentioning Solapur, right? Marathwada. Now, one of the problems in many such regions of Maharashtra is the fact that many rivers have lost their base flow value because the aquifers surrounding these rivers have been exploited to the extent that the physical connection between the aquifer and the river is severe. Now, in such conditions, floods, yes, will recharge, but given the geology of the aquifers, given the geology of the region, basalt aquifers, which have extremely limited sometimes and extremely variable permeabilities, where the flood water will actually lead to recharge and where it will not is anybody's guess. To actually have a more detailed element of this whole process, that's where I would like to stop at this. So, it's extremely poorly understood. There could be areas where you can use groundwater levels to even predict what's going to come in terms of floods, landslides, and certain disasters. That's the other side of things. On the recharge part, a lot of the work that we do ourselves is based on an internationally accepted process called managed aquifer recharge. And managed aquifer recharge has many dimensions. First of all, it's not just pushing water into the ground and leaving everything else as something that is untenable business. Now, unfortunately, because recharge is an easy solution, supply side, we tend to do that. So there is a trade-off. If there is an investment in recharge to an aquifer system, then the users of that aquifer system must practice responsible behavior in terms of how the recharge is used, how it is equitably distributed and not taken up by a few, how we ensure that the process of recharge itself is safe, secure, and does not necessarily include potentials of contamination. There's a whole process. So, injection recharge is just about, is one dimension. There are other mechanisms of recharge. Injection recharge is one. There are spreading methods. So, for example, there's a lot of watershed management practices in the mountainous hard rock regions of India. How can aquifer information and aquifer knowledge be integrated into conservation practices is also part of MAR on one side and watershed management on the other side. So all these require a certain set of protocols. And those protocols have to be followed because you simply cannot look at groundwater recharge as pushing water into the ground. Like Mr. Khan was saying, that the floodplains, the river channels of the alluvial systems of India have a potential for injection recharge. There's water available on the surface. The aquifers are regional and extensive enough to accommodate and assimilate large volumes of water. They have also been exploited in many parts of the region. And therefore, what is relevant to one area may not necessarily be relevant to the other area. If I were to design a injection recharge system, which we do here for basalt aquifers, I need information on the aquifers. What are their depths? What are their intake capacities? What is their current situation? So there is a lot of that to the recharge process itself. And I think we should move a little beyond the extraction to recharge ratio. Because what we tend to forget is extraction is the artificial discharge of groundwater. And recharge is the natural or artificial injection of water. Extraction from what? And recharge where? The answer is aquifers. And we seldom study the aquifer properties and aquifer characteristics when we think both of extraction and recharge. So for me, the ratio of extraction and to recharge is not a complete indicator of what's happening to groundwater in a particular situation, unless you take into account the storage potential of the aquifer, the properties of the aquifer, the health of the aquifer. It still is an incomplete set of matrix.
Okay, thank you so much for this response. And I see Zeenath has some more reference points. Zeenath, would you like to unmute yourself and speak? And if you can please switch on your camera.
I will do that. Hi, thank you very much, Dr. Kulkarni. It was a pleasure listening to you. But although I did join in a little late, but I'm going to go back into the recordings that we always get from W4W. But in the last few slides that you were talking about the relationship between the aquifer health and the ecosystem health. My question really is that given that, and you mentioned yourself that the ecosystem health is the more visible, we can see it, so we track it. But is there a kind of a point at which we must start giving red flags when we see the visible health going down, that there is something happening below ground? Because aquifer health is not being tracked in that sense that dynamically. So that was one question. And the second related to it is at our national level, what are the barriers to tracking aquifer health? By whether it's by the groundwater boards or by any other sort of entities.
So
Okay.
I'm not too sure about the second part in terms of how it's tracked, because I think aquifer and ecosystem health, well, together.
Right.
Integrated aquifer ecosystem health is a fairly new concept, and we are sort of struggling with that, as I can see. There could be indicators, but I think it's difficult to lay down those indicators as a standard for all areas in India, because all areas, different areas will have different standards. In terms of the red flags, that's exactly what I meant. If we are able to red flag disturbances in ecosystem health, specific ecosystems like forests and its potential impact on aquifer health.
Right.
Likewise, for example, if we have overexploitation in an area, and if we have grasslands or forests that earlier, before pre-exploitation periods, were deriving some benefit from the aquifers below, in terms of soil moisture, in terms of dry season soil moisture with a shallow water table, how is that going to impact ecosystem? Because it's not a one-way traffic, is it?
Right.
It's a complementary traffic. Now, I still see it as a one-way traffic generally, that, the environmentalists look at disturbances in environment as a one-way impact on aquifers, seldom realizing that you might actually have the best ecosystem health in the world in your area, but something is happening in your aquifer that you're not aware of. And, somebody else is mining the aquifer somewhere else.
And that could lead to a catastrophic tipping point suddenly.
That could lead to a catastrophe. Rivers, for example. Drying up of rivers is fairly and squarely and easily blamed on climate. Climate is one factor. Aquifer exploitation and drop, especially shallow aquifer exploitation in the catchment areas, could have a similar effect. It could dry up rivers, like I showed you.
Yeah.
Without even any significant climate change causes. So I think it's a complex relationship, and there has to be a conscious effort in understanding the complex relationship, the complex crisis, that will then allow us to come up with certain protocols. I used the word protocols before.
Yeah.
We don't have enough protocols in place. We jump from the crisis to regulation, to legislation, to even activism on this side. I think we need protocols, and protocols are not difficult to develop. That's all I can say at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Himanshu. I am still holding my question, so I think I will take the opportunity now. And I'm going to ask like a very naive child who just wants to know ABC of aquifer, despite attending your full session. Very simple question on global scale. What makes India consume almost quarter of the world's groundwater. What is it something related to one? We can go back to green revolution, industrial revolution. Why is it? Is it also something related to surface water? If you can put it in very simple way.
So you want to ask a few more and then I can.
Okay, so then my next question is actually when you and Zeenat were talking about it, I want to highlight an example from the Physical Research Laboratory or PRL study where they highlighted that Ahmedabad is sinking 3 millimeter every year, and one of the main attribute of the sinking of Ahmedabad or land is the groundwater extraction. So, so there can be, additionalities, or I say, what do you call it, counterfactual effects which are not directly studied. So there are many impacts on the ecosystem as well. So my question to you is, when we see so much of groundwater extraction and minuscule, and you rightly mentioned that this injection of recharge or aquifer does not really mean recharge of aquifer. In urban areas, which was also asked earlier, the disparity of consumption of groundwater and surface water for that matter as compared to its recharge, is it something about the lack of education on groundwater across disciplines? So I'm talking about the educated elites who are the main consumers of groundwater. Although we say that majority of the groundwater in India is consumed by the rural sector, 70% is attributed to the rural sector. But I would like to close the loop here, saying that what rural sector is growing is for the urban sector now, given that we have 50% population now in the urban areas. So I will say that even they are consuming more water for agriculture or industry, it is eventually coming to the urban areas. Where do you find we stand today on groundwater education? Even I ask this question with a very deep heart because I have also spent around 3 decades on really looking at how water education is so much missing in India. Within water, then groundwater is of course probably in the back bench of water education, because we still do not have surface water education, and much of the water education institutes are also closing because they don't get students to study. Where do we stand in water education, groundwater education in this? So that this myth can be broken that rural consumes more. I feel urban is consuming all the water. So if you can highlight both the things.
So Mansi, I'll use a few slides later on just
Sure.
to come to this last part. See, I think coming to your first question, I really don't have an answer in terms of why India is consuming more. I just look at the last 100 years. And the last 100 years, no other place in the world seems like India. The last 100 years, especially the last 80 years. So in some ways, it's a silent revolution. And that is what people in Spain, I think it was Ramon Llamas and that group, which looked at this at a global scale in terms of how farmers invested their own resources to develop food and food security. And it became a silent revolution, especially where surface water was not readily available, either in arid areas where rivers dry up or in areas where dam water, canal water cannot reach. So I think India's groundwater story was a blind spot till the early 2000s. I mean, if you look at global statistics, we became the largest user in the 1980s. Yes. And despite that, if you look at India's policies and programs, it was about extraction. It was about creating more wells. It still is. So we have never been able to understand and acknowledge the common pool nature of groundwater. Maybe it's due to its invisible nature, but increasingly also because I feel a lot of formal education is about extraction, is about technologies of extraction.
The whole management discourse is about it.
So it's how disciplines do not talk to each other, because the paradigm of common pool resources has evolved more through a social sciences perspective, maybe an economics and political science perspective, which is not something that is necessarily taught to people studying geology or,
Yes.
for that matter, engineering. It's a completely different sort of sets of two boxes. The other thing is we don't have, so that I feel is, that story is interesting. That story is something that would probably require a longer period of time. I think it was a blind spot. Groundwater was a blind spot. And that is one of the reasons why India emerged as the largest user of groundwater in the world. There are many reasons why I call it a blind spot. The sinking of cities, for me, it's not new. I studied the sinking of cities that people were researching on when I was a student. So Bangkok, Mexico City, there was a city I don't remember from China, had evidences of sinking due to over-extraction of groundwater. All these were in loose, unconsolidated aquifer material. Okay. And I would say 30% of India is sitting on this kind of aquifer systems. So we need to be worried. And that's where I think we need more evidence on this. And this is exactly what I meant, that this is really damaging aquifers, the physical damage to aquifers. So when you remove groundwater, the two things happening. One is in cities, we remove groundwater, we remove goods excessively, but we also extract the resource material, the aquifer material. So now you have lesser space to take, you have lesser space, you have lesser aquifer material and lesser groundwater in whatever aquifer material exists to actually take on the increasing load of our cities. It's as simple as that. And therefore, in terms of education and literacy, one of the challenges on groundwater is how do you demystify the subject of groundwater without compromising on its complexity.
Yes.
We tend to either oversimplify or we keep it so complex that we lose the value of doing both of these together. And that is the reason why I'm actually using the word demystification. And I would like to come to your last part on the rural versus urban, precisely on this point. If you'll just allow me to share 3 slides.
Sure. Sure. While you select your slide, let me just use the time to announce our continuous water conversations going on. This Friday, we have an interesting artist coming us on Friday Water Art session on March 13th at 5 p.m. IST. We talk about closing the loop, looking at glass waste and the future of water conservation. The joining link is in the chat box. Next week, we have Monday Munching and Musing with Women for Water last session to celebrate our 100 sessions. It will be on March 16th at 5 p.m. IST to acknowledge and appreciate the water endeavors of the Wiki Water Resource Council and the women who have been working in the water sector. Next Wednesdays for Water session is of the Riverscape series on March 25th at 5 p.m. IST, and we discuss on Bihar's changing riverscapes, floods, droughts, and the fate of the small rivers. All the joining links are there. Please know that this is also a water literacy plan which we have been running for nearly 5 years now. We are very proud to be inching towards 450 sessions, and Wednesdays for Water itself is our signature series, coming close to 200 sessions, and that's why we have Dr. Kulkarni here to celebrate our 200 sessions of very action-packed, hard discussions, and you saw it today, you experienced it. We hope that you will continuously support and encourage us doing these conversations. Over to you, Himanshu.
So I thought I'll just share, try and address your last question, and with that, possibly maybe open up the debate even more.
Yeah.
Okay. So just 3 slides. Okay. So see, one problem that we have is this whole question of how we use different units in India for different uses of water. Drinking water liters per capita per day. Urban water supplies 1,000 million cubic feet, TMC.
Yes.
When we look at agriculture, we look at either cubic meters or hectometers. When we look at rainfall, we measure it in millimeters or centimeters. When we look at dam building, it's so many thousand cubic meters of water. So, the metrics of water are not common. And this actually does injustice to the whole urban-rural argument. First and foremost, I think the urban and rural is more a continuum now than ever before. I call
Yes.
it the urban-rural continuum of water. Okay, there are reasons for that. But let me actually show you something very interesting. If we use, for example, in agriculture, the crop water demand per unit of land. The crop water demand per unit of land. Let me just get rid of the meeting panel. Okay. And so therefore we use, say, for example, 1 hectare of land. Let's say we look at an area which is growing 1 hectare of a certain crop. Let's say bajra or jowar or rice or wheat. And we know how much water is required for growing that crop in 1 year in 1 hectare of land. Or take sugarcane for it, which is an annual crop. We know exactly how much of water is required to grow 1 hectare of sugarcane crop. Okay, X amount. Now we take urban India and we look at how many people require drinking water on 1 hectare of land. We look at their demand. We looked at the crop water demand. So we look at the human demand on the same area of land. And what you find is something very interesting.
Wow, this is
This is something that we do,
staggering.
that we have done as a part of our work. We look at the annual water demand in millimeters because you can then measure it in the same metrics. How much water is required in millimeters of water on 1 hectare of urban space, built urban space with residents? And that includes their daily water needs, whether it's whatever. In the rural sector, in a village, for example, the crop water demand far exceeds the drinking water demand. So the drinking water demand is negligible. So you don't compare the rural drinking water demand with the urban drinking water demand. This is very, very bad comparison, especially when you're looking at groundwater. Now what you do is density of people per hectare of land, and then I've just put a table in terms of crop water requirement per hectare of land for each crop. Now, Pune is somewhere there today on an average. In fact, the area where I live, it's probably going to be somewhere there. The water demand is probably going to be around whatever that is, 1,000, 1,500 or something like that. Now, that demand today actually falls in a category where if that area were to be used with that amount of water given to the farmer, they would either grow rice, cotton, banana, and turmeric. But some of our areas actually has a much higher demand, going up to 2,000 millimeters. I actually have such information from from some work that we did in Bangalore, from some work that we are doing in Bombay. That 1 hectare area today, in terms of just domestic demand for the urban, is equivalent to growing sugarcane on that area.
Wow.
Sugarcane and rice are now water extraction culprits.
Yeah.
More sugarcane than rice. But urban growth, vertical urban growth, is not an equal culprit.
Yeah.
I won't go in terms of defending one the other. I'm just saying that this is what I mean by even our thinking has to be inclusive of this urban water continuum that I talked about.
Yeah.
So I'll stop at that. If people are
Yes,
interested in
and
more
yes,
on that, we can
yeah,
come back.
we have to actually close the session because otherwise we run into problem of editing and uploading it into the public domain. But most important, learning to actually have the groundwater literacy, where some of you have been really taking, I will say, the baton for all of us to make groundwater or water literacy to every corner of the country, which is really required now. But of course, looking at the nuances and complexities, it also gives me an opportunity to challenge all of you to work on social ecological system framework of Elinor Ostrom's work, where we can look at these interactions or interconnectedness, as Himanshu talked about, between aquifer and ecosystem health. And we are not away from ecosystem health. We have to also realize that, and that was very clearly evident. And I think one most important point which you raised in the last word, which also encourages us to look at things from social ecological perspective, is that we are having so much of knowledge. It is fragmented with different, I will say, vocabularies. And very classic example you presented is the way groundwater is measured at different space, and that itself requires an integration to bring that interconnectedness and the knowledge which is required. We will continue this conversation. I can see how passionate, Himanshu, you are, and we are also keen to hear from you. We can go on and on, but for the reason very well known for all of us, digital health, as well as the technical health of this session, we have to close this session. Thank you so much, all of you, for this wonderful session. I hope, Himanshu, you enjoyed the session, as we promised to you that it will be a conversation for you. And we are so happy that you actually came to us to celebrate with us the 200 sessions of Wednesdays for Water. Deep gratitude to the entire team, to all the speakers, nearly 700 of them who have spoken on our platform, in a campaign where we want to make it a citizens' movement to educate each one of us more about water. Thank you so much, all of you. Please take care. See you soon.
Thanks everyone for listening to me.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Bye.